The Zephyrian Empire's war machine had never known defeat. For 3 centuries, their advanced technology and superior tactics had crushed every species that dared oppose them. The ridge on planet Kepler 442b was supposed to be just another checkpoint in their conquest of the human colonies. Admiral Vextar stood on the command deck of the flagship Dominion's Edge, watching the tactical display with satisfaction. Below them, the ridge stretched for hundreds of kilometers, a natural fortress that his engineers had transformed into an impregnable stronghold. Energy shields hummed with power. Plasma cannons pointed toward the valleys below, and automated defense systems scanned every approach with deadly precision. "Status report," Vextar commanded, his forearms folding behind his back in the traditional Zephyrian stance of authority. "All defensive positions are at full strength." "Admiral," replied Commander Kailas, her serpentine head swaying as she reviewed the data streams. "The humans have been trapped in the valleys for 6 standard days. Their supply lines are cut, and our sensors detect no movement toward our positions." Vexitar's mandibles clicked in amusement. These humans had proven more resilient than expected, surviving longer than most species when faced with Zephyrian might. But resilience meant nothing without the technology to back it up. The ridge was a death trap for anyone foolish enough to assault it. The human colony of New Terra had been established only 50 years ago, a modest settlement of farmers, miners, and researchers. When the Zephyrian fleet arrived, they expected swift capitulation. Instead, they found a population that refused to surrender, choosing to flee into the wilderness rather than submit to imperial rule. It had been an annoyance, nothing more. The Empire's ground forces had herded the scattered human settlements into the valleys below the ridge, where they could be contained and eventually processed. Some would become workers in the Empire's industrial complexes. Others would serve as test subjects for new weapons. The fate of conquered species was always the same. "What's the status of our hunting patrols?" Vextar asked. "Minimal contact, sir. The humans appear to be hiding in cave systems throughout the valley. Our thermal scanners detect scattered heat signatures, but they're too dispersed for effective targeting. We estimate approximately 12,000 civilians remain in the area. 12,000 humans against the might of the 7th Imperial Battle Group." The thought was almost insulting. Each Zephyrian warrior was worth 10 of any other species in combat, and they had the technological advantage of plasma weaponry, energy shields, and orbital support. The ridge itself was a marvel of Imperial engineering. What had once been a simple geological formation was now a layered defense network. The lower slopes were mined with proximity explosives. The middle elevations housed automated turret systems that could track and eliminate targets at ranges exceeding 5 kilometers. The upper reaches contained the main base, complete with shield generators, communication arrays, and landing platforms for their atmospheric craft. From orbit, 3 Zephyrian dreadnoughts maintained overwatch, their massive weapons capable of glassing entire sections of the planet's surface if needed. The humans had no spacecraft, no orbital defenses, and no hope of reinforcement. Earth was 12 light-years away, far beyond any reasonable response time. "Admiral, we're receiving a transmission from the surface," announced the communications officer, his scaled features showing confusion. "It appears to be from the human leadership." "Put it through," Vextar ordered, curious to hear what desperate plea these primitives might offer. The holographic display shimmered, revealing a human figure. The being was smaller than a Zephyrian, with pale skin marked by weather and exhaustion. Despite the obvious stress, the human's eyes held something that surprised Vextar: determination. "I am Colonel Sarah Chen, commanding officer of the New Terra Colonial Defense Force," the human said. "I'm calling to discuss terms." Vexitar's mandibles clicked again, this time in derision. "Terms? You are in no position to negotiate terms, human. Your people are trapped, outnumbered, and outgunned. Surrender now, and your deaths will be swift." "I'm not here to surrender," Chen replied calmly. "I'm here to give you one chance to withdraw from this system. Leave now, and no harm will come to your forces." The bridge fell silent. Several officers exchanged glances of disbelief. Vextar felt his anger rising. The traditional Zephyrian response to such audacity from an inferior species. "You dare threaten the Empire?" Vextar snarled. "I have 3 dreadnoughts in orbit and 10,000 warriors on this ridge. You have a handful of survivors hiding in caves like vermin. What possible threat could you pose?" Chen's expression didn't change. "We've been studying your tactics for 6 days, Admiral. We know how your technology works and we know its weaknesses. This is your only warning." The transmission ended abruptly, leaving the bridge in stunned silence. Vextar's rage built to a crescendo before he managed to control himself. He had dealt with desperate species before, ones that made empty threats in their final hours. But something about the humans' confidence bothered him. "Commander Kyle S., increase patrol frequency in the valleys. I want thermal sweeps every hour. If these humans are planning something, I want to know about it." "Yes, Admiral. Should we begin preliminary bombardment?" Vextar considered the option. Orbital strikes would end this quickly, turning the valleys into molten glass and eliminating the human threat entirely. But the Empire preferred to capture industrial facilities intact when possible, and the mining operations in this system showed promise. Not yet. Give them another day to reconsider. Fear has a way of changing minds. As night fell on Kepler 442b, the ridge blazed with artificial light. Guard towers swept the surrounding terrain with searchlights, and patrol craft traced lazy circles through the atmosphere. Every sensor array worked at maximum efficiency, probing the darkness for signs of human movement. In the valleys below, 12,000 humans waited in silence. They had no plasma weapons, no energy shields, and no orbital support. What they did have was something the Zephyrian Empire had never encountered before: human ingenuity born of desperation, and the willingness to sacrifice everything for freedom. The Empire thought it was safe on the ridge. They thought their technology made them invincible. They thought wrong. In hidden workshops carved from cave walls, human engineers worked through the night. In communication bunkers shielded from Zephyrian sensors, human tacticians finalized their plans. In the deepest caverns, human soldiers prepared for an assault that would shatter every assumption the Empire had about technological superiority. The ridge was indeed impregnable. But sometimes the best way to take a fortress wasn't to go through its defenses. Sometimes you had to go around them, under them, or make them irrelevant entirely. The disaster that would befall the Empire wasn't approaching from the valleys below. It was already here, hidden in plain sight, waiting for the moment when human determination would prove stronger than alien arrogance. Dr. Marcus Webb crouched in the makeshift laboratory, surrounded by salvaged equipment and jury-rigged devices that would have horrified any safety inspector back on Earth. The cave system beneath New Terra had become humanity's last hope, and Webb was working with materials that shouldn't exist outside of theoretical physics papers. "Hand me that resonance crystal," he called to his assistant, Elena Vasquez, who had traded her career as a xenobiology researcher for a crash course in weapons engineering. The crystal in question had been torn from a downed Zephyrian scout craft 3 days earlier, during one of their failed reconnaissance missions. "Marcus, are you absolutely certain this will work?" Elena asked, carefully passing the alien technology to him. The crystal pulsed with an inner light that seemed to respond to human biorhythms in ways they didn't fully understand. "Certain? No, hopeful?" "Absolutely." Webb attached the crystal to a device that looked like a cross between a mining laser and a microwave oven. The Zephyrians made one critical error in their assessment of human capabilities. They assumed we would fight their technology with our technology. Above them, the ridge fortress continued its vigilant watch. Automated systems scanned the valleys with mechanical precision, searching for heat signatures, movement patterns, and electromagnetic emissions that would indicate human activity. The sensors were remarkably sophisticated, capable of detecting a human heartbeat from 3 kilometers away. What they couldn't detect was what the humans were actually doing. Colonel Chen moved through the tunnel network like a ghost, her combat experience from the Martian border conflicts serving her well in this underground war. The cave system was vast, carved by millennia of water flow and expanded by desperate human hands over the past week. What had started as a few natural caverns now extended for dozens of kilometers in all directions. "Status report," she whispered into her comm unit, the signal traveling through fiber optic cables strung along the tunnel walls. Radio communication was impossible with the Zephyrian. "Jamming fields in place. Team, Alpha is in position beneath the eastern defense grid," came the reply from Lieutenant Hayes. "Team Beta has reached the power relay station. Gamma is still 15 minutes out from their target." Chen checked her watch. They had exactly 4 hours until the Zephyrian shift change, when their guard rotations would create the smallest window of opportunity they were likely to get. 4 hours to execute a plan that violated every principle of conventional warfare. The humans had learned something important about their enemy over the past week. The Zephyrian Empire was incredibly advanced, but their advancement had made them predictable. Every system followed logical protocols. Every defense had been designed to counter known threats. Every tactical doctrine assumed their enemies would fight using recognizable military strategies. Humans, as it turned out, were not particularly logical when their survival was at stake. In another section of the cave network, Chief Petty Officer Sarah Kim worked on what had once been a water purification system and was now something else entirely. The device hummed with barely contained energy, its improvised components held together by determination and salvaged Zephyrian power cells. "The harmonic frequency is locked in," she reported to the team. "If Webb's calculations are correct, this should create a resonance cascade in their shield generators." "And if his calculations are wrong?" asked Private Morrison, who had been a geological survey technician before the invasion. "Then we all die horribly, and the Zephyrians add another species to their list of conquered worlds," Kim replied cheerfully. "But at least we'll die trying something they never saw coming." The plan was insane by any conventional military standard. Instead of attacking the ridge's defenses, they were going to attack the ridge itself. The geological surveys from the colony's early days had revealed something the Zephyrians had overlooked in their rush to establish their fortress. The ridge was not as stable as it appeared. The rock formation was primarily sedimentary layers held together by a network of mineral veins. Remove the right support structures, create the right resonance patterns, and the entire eastern face of the ridge would collapse into the valley below, along with whatever happened to be built on top of it. Webb's breakthrough had come from studying captured Zephyrian technology. Their energy shields operated on a principle of harmonic stabilization, creating interference patterns that deflected incoming attacks. But harmony could become discord with the right frequency modulation. And discord, when applied to the geological substrates beneath the shield generators, could create catastrophic structural failures. "Elena, start the countdown sequence," Webb ordered. "And send word to Chen. If we're going to do this, it has to be synchronized perfectly." 3 kilometers away in the deepest part of the cave system, Team Gamma worked by the light of chemical flares. Their target was the underground river that fed the valley's water supply. But they weren't trying to poison it or redirect it. They were turning it into a weapon. The Zephyrians had detected the river system during their initial surveys, but dismissed it as strategically irrelevant. It was just water, after all, flowing through natural channels that posed no threat to their elevated position. They had failed to consider what would happen if that water suddenly changed temperature by several hundred degrees. Sergeant Rivera placed the final thermal charge against the limestone wall, his hand steady despite the magnitude of what they were attempting. When the charges detonated, they would create a series of steam explosions that would follow the underground river system directly beneath the ridge. The sudden pressure release would destabilize the same geological formations that Webb was targeting from above. "Charges set," Rivera reported. "All teams, this is Gamma. We are weapons-free in 3 hours, 52 minutes. On the ridge above, Admiral Vextar reviewed the night's patrol reports with growing irritation. His forces had detected no significant human activity, no preparation for attack, no signs of the threat that Colonel Chen had promised. The thermal scan showed scattered heat signatures in the caves, but they appeared to be civilians huddling for warmth rather than soldiers preparing for battle. "Perhaps the human was bluffing," suggested Commander Kyles. "Their species is known for deceptive behavior when cornered." "Perhaps," Vextar agreed, but something nagged at him. His instincts, honed by decades of conquest, whispered that something was wrong. The humans were too quiet, too passive. Even beaten species usually showed more signs of desperation. "Double the sensor sweeps," he ordered. "I want full spectrum analysis of every cave entrance, every thermal anomaly, every electromagnetic fluctuation in those valleys." But the Zephyrian sensors were designed to detect technology they understood, energy signatures they recognized, and threats they had encountered before. They were not designed to detect human innovation born of necessity, or to recognize that sometimes the most dangerous weapons were the ones that didn't look like weapons at all. In the caves below, 12,000 humans held their breath and waited. They had no plasma cannons, no energy shields, and no orbital support. What they had was something that had served their species well throughout its history: the ability to find a way when no way seemed possible. The ridge was indeed impregnable against conventional assault. But the humans weren't planning a conventional assault. They were planning to make the ridge itself disappear. Above them, the Zephyrian Empire maintained its vigil, confident in its technological superiority and tactical doctrine. Below them, the countdown continued, marking the moments until disaster would strike from a direction they had never considered, from within the very ground they stood upon. The countdown timer in Colonel Chen's command cave read 2 hours and 17 minutes when everything started to go wrong. Contact. Contact! Lieutenant Hayes's voice crackled through the fiber optic network. Zephyrian patrol craft descending into Grid 77. They're conducting intensive scans. Chen felt her stomach drop. Grid 77 was directly above Team Alpha's position. If the Zephyrians had somehow detected their excavation work beneath the eastern defense grid, the entire operation would be compromised. All teams, implement radio silence protocol 7, she ordered. Hayes, what's their scan pattern? Thermal and seismic, ma'am. They're using deep penetration sensors. I think they've detected our tunnel work. The Zephyrian patrol craft was a sleek, predatory-looking vessel about the size of a shuttle, armed with precision plasma weapons and sensor arrays that could map underground structures in real time. Chen watched through a hastily installed periscope as the alien ship descended into the valley, its scanning beams carving through the darkness like malevolent searchlights. 3 kilometers away, Dr. Webb paused in his final calibrations. Elena, monitor the seismic sensors. If they detect our resonance chamber, we'll have to move up the timeline. The resonance chamber was their greatest achievement and greatest vulnerability. Webb had spent 48 hours straight converting a natural cave formation into a massive acoustic weapon, using salvaged Zephyrian technology to create harmonic frequencies that would destabilize the ridge's geological structure. But the device generated distinctive energy signatures that sophisticated sensors might detect. Marcus, I'm reading increased electromagnetic activity from the ridge, Elena reported, her voice tight with tension. They're boosting their sensor output. Above them, Admiral Vextar had finally listened to his instincts. The human commander's confidence bothered him more than he cared to admit, and the lack of detectable activity in the valleys felt wrong. Prey species always showed more desperation when cornered. Commander Kylas, deploy all available scout craft. I want deep scans of every cave system, every thermal anomaly, every geological irregularity in those valleys. Something is happening down there. Sir, deep scans will require significant power allocation. We'll need to reduce shield strength to boost the sensor arrays. Vextar considered this. The humans had no orbital capability, no heavy weapons, and no way to assault the ridge directly. Temporary shield reduction seemed an acceptable risk to solve the mystery of their unusual behavior. Do it. Reduce defensive shields to 60% and redirect power to sensors. I want to know what these humans are hiding. The decision would prove to be Admiral Vextar's first serious mistake of the campaign. In the caves below, Dr. Webb felt the change immediately. The electromagnetic interference is dropping, he called to Elena. Their shield generators are operating at reduced power. Elena checked her instruments, hardly believing what she was seeing. Marcus, this is our chance. If their shields are weakened, we can advance the timeline. The resonance cascade will be more effective. Webb's hands flew over his improvised controls. The timing had to be perfect. The harmonic frequencies needed to build gradually, creating a resonance pattern that would spread through the ridge's geological structure like cracks in glass. Too fast, and the Zephyrians would detect the attack and reinforce their shields. Too slow, and their increased sensor sweeps would reveal the human positions. All teams, this is Webb. Beginning preliminary resonance buildup. Stand by for acceleration protocol. The acoustic weapon began its work with a sound so low it was felt rather than heard. Deep beneath the earth, carefully calculated frequencies began to propagate through the rock layers, seeking out the mineral veins and structural weaknesses that held the ridge together. 3 kilometers away, Sergeant Rivera's thermal charges were creating their own kind of havoc. The underground river system was beginning to heat beyond the boiling point, generating steam pressure that followed the natural water channels directly beneath the Zephyrian fortress. Temperature spike detected in Sector 9, Rivera reported. Steam pressure building as projected. We're go for thermal expansion in 90 minutes. But 90 minutes was suddenly too long. The Zephyrian scout craft above Team Alpha had found something. Lieutenant Hayes watched in horror as the alien vessel's scanning beam penetrated the cave roof, revealing the extensive tunnel network his team had spent days excavating. "They've made us," Hayes transmitted, deploying countermeasures. The countermeasures were purely human in their audacity. Instead of trying to hide from the Zephyrian sensors, Hayes's team activated a series of improvised noisemakers scattered throughout the tunnel system. Drilling equipment, mining lasers, and sonic excavators all activated simultaneously, creating a cacophony of industrial sound that masked their actual activities. To the Zephyrian sensors, it looked like panicked humans had suddenly started digging escape tunnels in random directions. The readings showed frantic, uncoordinated activity that suggested desperation rather than planning. Curious, Admiral Vextar mused as he studied the sensor reports. They appear to be attempting to dig deeper into the cave systems. Perhaps they hope to escape through underground passages. It was exactly what the humans wanted him to think, but the deception had a cost. The additional power required for the noisemakers was drawing energy from their primary weapon systems. Dr. Webb watched his power. Readings dropped below optimal levels just as the resonance cascade reached its critical phase. "Elena, can we compensate for the power loss? Not without reducing the effectiveness of the harmonic frequencies. We need those noisemakers to maintain operational security." Webb made a decision that would have seemed impossible a week earlier. "Contact Chen. Tell her we're accelerating to final phase. All teams execute in 60 minutes, not 90. The message reached Colonel Chen just as another Zephyrian scout craft entered the valley. Her carefully planned timeline was collapsing, but her team had trained for contingencies. Human adaptability was about to face its greatest test. "All teams, this is command. Execute acceleration protocol. Alpha, maintain your deception for 50 more minutes, then withdraw to safety positions. Beta, are you ready for early power relay severance?" "Affirmative, command. We can cut their backup power systems on your mark. Gamma, status on thermal charges? Ready for early detonation, Colonel. Steam pressure is building faster than projected anyway." Chen felt a grim smile cross her face. The Zephyrians had made one crucial error in their assessment of human capabilities. They had assumed that human plans, like their own, required perfect conditions and precise timing to succeed. They had never encountered a species that specialized in making things work when everything went wrong. "All teams, final countdown begins now. 58 minutes to simultaneous execution. Remember, we only get one chance at this." Above them, the Zephyrian Empire continued its sensor sweeps, confident that their technological superiority would reveal any threat in time to counter it. They had never faced an enemy that could turn their own technology against them, or one that understood that sometimes the best plan was the one that looked like complete chaos. The ridge hummed with alien technology, its defenses pointing outward toward threats that would never come. Deep below, human ingenuity worked with captured Zephyrian equipment to prepare a disaster that would come from within, striking at the very foundations of imperial certainty. 58 minutes until the Empire learned that safety was an illusion, and that sometimes the most primitive species could teach the most advanced civilizations a lesson in the art of war. 37 minutes before the disaster, Admiral Vextar made his second critical mistake. "Sir, we've identified the source of the underground activity," Commander Kyles reported, her serpentine features animated with satisfaction. "The humans are attempting to construct escape tunnels. Multiple digging operations across 7 grid sectors." Vextar studied the tactical display, watching the scattered points of activity throughout the valley cave systems. The pattern looked random, desperate, exactly what he would expect from a cornered primitive species. "Pathetic," he concluded. "They think they can burrow their way to freedom. Deploy ground assault teams to grid sectors 4, 7, and 9. Seal those tunnels and capture whatever humans we find." "Should we maintain the increased sensor sweeps, Admiral?" "No. Return shield generators to full power. These tunneling operations pose no threat to our position. I want our defenses at maximum strength when we begin the final assault tomorrow." As the Zephyrian shields returned to full power, Dr. Webb felt the electromagnetic interference slam back into place like a crushing weight. His resonance chamber, so carefully calibrated to work within the reduced interference field, suddenly found itself fighting against the full defensive strength of the alien fortress. "Elena, we're losing harmonic cohesion. Webb called out, his hands dancing across improvised controls. The increased interference is disrupting our frequency patterns. Can you compensate? Not with conventional methods. Webb's expression was grim as he studied his readouts. The acoustic weapon required precise frequency control to propagate through the ridge's geological structure. With the Zephyrian shields at full strength, those frequencies were being scattered and distorted beyond effectiveness. How long until the ground assault teams reach our position? Elena asked. Lieutenant Hayes estimates 15 minutes before they breach his tunnels. After that, maybe 20 minutes before they trace the network back to us. Webb made a decision that would have horrified any safety engineer. We're going to overload the resonance chamber. Instead of gradual harmonic buildup, we'll create a massive acoustic pulse that cuts through their interference. Marcus, that could destabilize this entire cave system. We might bring down the mountain on our own heads. Better than letting the Zephyrians process us for their work camps. Webb began reconfiguring his equipment for massive power overload. The salvaged Zephyrian energy cells would burn out instantly, but not before creating an acoustic shockwave powerful enough to shatter rock formations across several kilometers. 3 levels above, Colonel Chen received Webb's new plan with characteristic calm. Understood, Doctor. All teams, we are now executing emergency protocol. Simultaneous detonation in 31 minutes. No exceptions, no delays. The emergency protocol was humanity's final gambit. Instead of the carefully timed sequence that would maximize their chances of survival, they would trigger everything at once, creating a catastrophic geological event that would make precise survival calculations impossible. It was the kind of plan that exemplified human warfare. If we can't win safely, we'll win dangerously. Lieutenant Hayes felt the Zephyrian assault team approaching through seismic vibrations in the tunnel walls. Their powered armor created distinctive footprint patterns that his improvised sensors could detect from 100 meters away. Contact in 12 minutes, he reported. Initiating final deception sequence. Hayes activated the last of his noisemakers, creating a sound pattern that suggested panicked humans fleeing deeper into the cave system. Then he and his team moved to their real positions. Charges placed at critical structural points throughout the tunnel network, designed to create a controlled collapse that would bury the Zephyrian assault team while appearing to be an accident. The Zephyrians, with their advanced technology and superior firepower, never considered that the humans might be willing to bury themselves to take their enemies with them. In the power relay section, Team Beta prepared for the most crucial part of their mission. The Zephyrian fortress drew its energy from 3 main sources: orbital power transmission from their fleet, local fusion generators, and backup power cells distributed throughout the complex. Team Beta's job was to sever the local power grid at exactly the right moment, forcing the aliens to rely on their backup systems just as every other part of the human plan reached critical phase. Power coupling charges are set, reported Chief Martinez. When we blow these relays, they'll have maybe 30 seconds of backup power before their secondary systems kick. In 30 seconds of reduced power during a catastrophic geological event would be more than enough. Sergeant Rivera's thermal charges had turned the underground river system into a pressure cooker. Steam was building throughout the natural channels beneath the ridge, seeking release through any available pathway. When the charges detonated simultaneously, the steam explosions would create a hydraulic shock that would propagate through every crack and fissure in the ridge's foundation. Temperature readings are off the charts, Rivera reported. We're way beyond the safety margins for the containment charges. There were no safety margins anymore. There was only success or extinction. Dr. Webb's resonance chamber had become something that existed on the edge between science and madness. Salvaged Zephyrian technology, human engineering, and desperate innovation had created a device that would have been impossible under any other circumstances. The acoustic weapon drew power from 6 different sources, used harmonic frequencies that technically shouldn't work in combination, and was held together by components that were operating far beyond their design specifications. Final systems check, Webb called out. Elena, confirm all resonance nodes are synchronized and ready. Marcus, the power readings are indicating we'll only get 1 pulse before complete system failure. 1 pulse is all we need. Above them, Admiral Vextar watched his ground assault teams close in on the human tunnel systems. Victory seemed assured. The humans had proven more resilient than expected, But resilience without superior technology was merely delayed defeat. "Sir, we're detecting some unusual seismic activity in the lower valley," reported the sensor officer. "Possible thermal events in the underground water systems. Probably a result of their desperate tunneling operations," Vextar dismissed. "Continue the assault." His third mistake was assuming that thermal events in underground water systems were not a weapon. 28 minutes until disaster. Colonel Chen stood in her command cave, surrounded by equipment that represented humanity's greatest strengths: adaptability, innovation, and the refusal to accept impossible odds. Every piece of technology in the chamber had been improvised, jury-rigged, or repurposed from its original function. Nothing worked the way it was supposed to, but everything worked together toward a single goal. All teams' final countdown. 28 minutes to simultaneous execution. Remember, we are not just fighting for our lives. We are fighting to prove that technology alone does not determine the outcome of war. The message was relayed through fiber optic cables to teams scattered throughout the cave system. Humans who had been farmers and miners and researchers a week ago, now prepared to teach the Zephyrian Empire a lesson in the fundamental unpredictability of human warfare. Above them, the ridge fortress hummed with alien confidence, its sensors scanning for threats that followed recognizable patterns. Its weapons pointed toward enemies that would attack from predictable directions. Below them, human ingenuity prepared to rewrite the rules of engagement in ways the Empire had never imagined possible. 14 minutes before disaster struck, the Zephyrian ground assault team breached Lieutenant Hayes' tunnel system. Movement detected, the lead Zephyrian warrior reported to Admiral Vextar. "Thermal signatures indicate human presence deeper in the tunnel network. Beginning pursuit." Hayes watched through his improvised sensors as 8 Zephyrian soldiers advanced through the tunnels his team had spent days excavating. Their powered armor made them nearly invulnerable to conventional weapons, but Hayes wasn't planning to use conventional weapons. "Target acquired," he whispered into his comm unit. "Initiating collapse sequence in 10 seconds. The Zephyrian assault team was following exactly the path Hayes had designed them to follow. Their sensors showed fleeing humans ahead, panicked thermal signatures moving deeper into what appeared to be a desperate escape route. They never considered that they were walking into a carefully prepared trap. Hayes triggered the first set of charges. The tunnel ceiling came down in a controlled avalanche that would have killed unprotected humans instantly. But the Zephyrian powered armor was designed to withstand much worse, and the warriors emerged from the rubble only slightly slowed. What they didn't realize was that the collapse had been designed to seal them into a specific section of the tunnel system, where Hayes' real surprise was waiting. "Contact the surface," the Zephyrian team leader ordered. "We have human hostiles trapped in a collapsed tunnel section. Requesting backup and excavation equipment." The message reached Admiral Vextar just as other reports began flooding in from across the valley. Seismic disturbances were increasing throughout the underground systems. Thermal events were spreading through the water channels. And most puzzling of all, the scattered human digging operations seemed to be coordinating their activities. "Commander Kyle S., I want a full geological survey of this ridge. Something is happening down there that our initial scans missed." "Admiral, a full geological survey would require several hours. Should we postpone the final assault?" Vextar considered the option. His instincts warned him that the humans were planning something beyond simple escape tunnels. But postponing the assault would mean acknowledging that 12,000 primitive survivors posed a genuine threat to the most advanced military force in the galaxy. No. Proceed with current operations. Deploy additional ground teams to support the tunnel. Clearance operation. It was his fourth mistake. 8 minutes before disaster. Dr. Webb's resonance chamber had achieved a state that existed somewhere between controlled science and barely contained chaos. The acoustic weapon was drawing more power than its components were designed to handle, generating harmonic frequencies that propagated through solid rock in ways that theoretical physics suggested shouldn't be possible. "Elena, confirm all backup systems are active. When this device overloads, we'll have about 30 seconds before the cave system becomes uninhabitable." Elena checked her emergency equipment one final time. Breathing apparatus ready, emergency shelter deployed, escape route confirmed. "Marcus, are you absolutely certain this will work?" "I'm certain it will create a geological event that the Zephyrians never anticipated. Beyond that, we're in the hands of physics and luck." Webb activated the final overload sequence. 6 Zephyrian power cells began dumping their entire energy reserves into the acoustic system simultaneously. The harmonic frequencies that emerged were so powerful, they could be felt through the soles of their feet, propagating through the ridge's foundation like an earthquake with surgical precision. 3 kilometers away, Sergeant Rivera's thermal charges had transformed the underground river system into a bomb, with a fuse measured in minutes rather than hours. Steam pressure had built beyond all safe limits, contained only by the natural rock formations that channeled the underground waterways. All charges confirmed ready, Rivera reported. Steam pressure is at 200% of maximum containment. When these charges blow, we're going to create a hydraulic shock that'll reach every foundation support under that ridge. The plan was working exactly as intended, and also nothing like they had expected. 5 minutes before disaster, Colonel Chen felt the first tremors through the cave floor. Webb's acoustic weapon was beginning to destabilize the ridge's geological structure, creating harmonic resonances that propagated through the mineral veins holding the rock formation together. It was working, but the effects were spreading faster than their computer models had predicted. All teams, accelerated timeline confirmed. Execute in 5 minutes. Final equipment check, then move to survival positions. The survival positions were carefully calculated locations within the cave system that should remain stable during the geological collapse they were about to trigger. Should being the operative term, since no one had ever attempted anything like this before. Team Beta prepared to sever the power relays that fed the Zephyrian fortress. Chief Martinez had identified the exact moment when the power grid would be most vulnerable, 30 seconds after the initial geological shock, when the automated systems would be attempting to compensate for structural damage. Power charges confirmed active. When we cut these relays, every backup system on that ridge will activate simultaneously. They'll be drawing maximum power just as their entire foundation starts coming apart. Above them, Admiral Vextar was finally beginning to understand that something was seriously wrong. The seismic readings were showing patterns that didn't match natural geological activity. The thermal events were too widespread and too coordinated to be accidental, and the human tunnel operations had stopped reporting random digging activity. "Sir, I'm reading massive energy buildups throughout the valley cave systems," the sensor officer reported. "These signatures don't match any known human technology." Because they're not using human technology, Vextar realized with dawning horror. They're using ours. Sound general alert. All units to maximum defensive posture. The alert came exactly 3 minutes too late. 2 minutes before disaster, Lieutenant. Hayes triggered his final surprise for the Zephyrian assault team trapped in his tunnel system. What appeared to be a collapsed escape route was actually a carefully designed channeling system that would direct the underground steam explosions directly through the tunnel network. Zephyrian ground team, you have 90 seconds to evacuate to minimum safe distance, Hayes transmitted on their emergency frequency. This is your only warning. The Zephyrian team leader received the message with confusion that quickly turned to alarm. Human prisoners didn't warn their captors about danger unless the danger was beyond any hope of survival. Surface command, requesting immediate extraction. The humans appear to have prepared some kind of explosive device. But there was no time for extraction. 1 minute before disaster. Dr. Webb's acoustic weapon achieved critical resonance. The harmonic frequencies that had been building through the ridge's geological structure suddenly reached the point where they began reinforcing each other, creating a cascade effect that propagated through every mineral vein, every structural weakness, every foundation support in the rock formation. Elena. Emergency positions now. They dove into their improvised shelter just as the resonance chamber began tearing itself apart. Zephyrian power cells exploded in sequence, but not before launching an acoustic shockwave that would be felt throughout the entire ridge system. 30 seconds before disaster, Sergeant Rivera watched his thermal readings spike beyond the maximum scale of his instruments. The underground river system had become a pressure vessel, containing the energy equivalent of a small nuclear device, all focused on the natural channels that ran directly beneath the Zephyrian fortress. All teams, this is Gamma. Thermal charges detonating in 5, 4, 3, 2. 10 seconds before disaster. Admiral. Vextar felt the first harmonic vibrations through the deck plating of his flagship. His sensors were screaming warnings about massive energy events throughout the valley, but none of the readings made sense according to any known scientific principles. All ships, emergency ascent to orbital position. Something is happening to the ridge. 5 seconds before disaster, Colonel Chen's final transmission reached every human team simultaneously. All units, execute now. For Earth, for humanity, for everyone who said impossible was just another word for untested. 0 seconds. The Empire thought it was safe on the ridge. Then disaster struck from every direction at once, and safety became a memory of a time when humans were just another primitive species that could be conquered with superior technology. The disaster began with silence. For exactly 2.7 seconds, every Zephyrian sensor on the ridge registered normal readings. The fortress hummed with mechanical precision, automated systems maintaining their eternal vigilance, guard rotations proceeding according to standard Imperial protocol. Then Dr. Webb's acoustic weapon reached critical resonance. The harmonic frequencies that had been building through the ridge's geological structure suddenly achieved perfect destructive interference. Every mineral vein that held the rock formation together began vibrating at its natural breaking point simultaneously. The effect propagated through hundreds of meters of solid stone in microseconds, creating a cascade failure that no engineering textbook had ever contemplated. Admiral Vextar felt it first as a subtle vibration through the deck plating of his command center. Within seconds, the vibration became a tremor. The tremor became a shake. The shake became something that had no name in any Zephyrian tactical manual. Seismic event, the sensor officer shouted over the growing noise. Magnitude readings are off scale. This isn't a natural earthquake. Vextar grabbed the command rail as his flagship lurched. Through the observation windows, he could see the eastern face of the ridge beginning to move in ways that defied physics. Massive sections of rock were shifting and grinding against each other, following harmonic patterns that seemed almost musical in their precision. Emergency ascent, all ships to orbital position immediately. But the harmonics were only the beginning. Sergeant Rivera's thermal charges detonated in perfect sequence, turning the underground river system into a hydraulic bomb of unprecedented scale. Superheated steam exploded through every natural channel beneath the ridge, following the watercourses that had carved these passages over millions of years. The steam explosions reached the ridge's foundation supports exactly 37 seconds after the harmonic cascade began. What had been merely dangerous geological instability suddenly became catastrophic structural failure. The ridge wasn't just cracking apart, it was being lifted from below by expanding steam pressure, while being shaken apart from within by acoustic resonance. Chief Martinez triggered the power relay charges at the precise moment when the Zephyrian backup systems were attempting to compensate for the seismic damage. Every defensive shield, every sensor array, every automated weapon system on the ridge simultaneously demanded maximum power just as their primary power grid was severed. The backup power cells, designed to handle brief outages during normal operations, were suddenly required to supply emergency power to an entire fortress that was literally coming apart. The power demands exceeded capacity by over 300%. Safety protocols that should have prevented overload had been damaged by the seismic activity. One by one, the backup power cells began exploding. Lieutenant Hayes's tunnel system had become a channeling mechanism for the underground steam explosions. The Zephyrian assault team trapped in his carefully designed maze found themselves at the center of a pressure wave that turned their own powered armor into their doom. The armor protected them from the initial blast but also trapped them in a tunnel that was rapidly filling with superheated steam. Surface command, emergency extraction required. The team leader screamed into his communicator. The entire tunnel system is collapsing. But surface command had its own problems. The eastern face of the ridge was collapsing in slow motion. Massive chunks of rock the size of city blocks grinding against each other as they followed gravity toward the valley floor. The Zephyrian fortress, built to withstand orbital bombardment, had never been designed to survive the ground beneath it, simply disappearing. Watchtowers toppled first, their foundations undermined by the expanding cracks that spiderwebbed across the ridge's surface. Defense batteries followed, their massive weapons tilting at impossible angles as the ground beneath them shifted and buckled. The main fortress structure, protected by energy shields and advanced materials, lasted almost a full minute before the geological forces overwhelmed its engineering. When it finally went down, it fell like a mountain, carrying with it 3 centuries of Imperial technological supremacy. Admiral Vextar's flagship was climbing desperately toward orbit, when the main fortress exploded. The combination of overloaded power cells, collapsing structures, and ammunition storage created a secondary explosion that lit up the valley like a miniature sun. Damage report, Vexitar shouted over the alarms that filled his bridge. Ridge fortification is completely destroyed, Commander Kyles reported, her voice shocked into emotional neutrality. Estimated casualties. Sir, we've lost the entire ground force. 10,000 warriors gone in under 5 minutes. Through the observation windows, they could see the disaster continuing to unfold. The ridge collapse had triggered secondary landslides throughout the valley. Dust clouds billowed into the atmosphere, blocking their sensors and making assessment impossible. Where their impregnable fortress had stood, there was now only a spreading debris field and geological chaos that would take months to stabilize. How? Vexitar demanded. How did 12,000 primitive humans destroy a fortress that could withstand fleet bombardment? But even as he asked the question, his tactical training was providing the answer. The humans hadn't attacked the fortress. They had attacked the planet. They had turned the ground itself into a weapon, using natural forces that no defense system could counter. In the caves below, Colonel Chen emerged from her emergency shelter to find a world transformed. The acoustic weapon had done more than destroy the ridge. It had rearranged the entire local geography. New cave passages had opened while others had collapsed entirely. Underground streams had changed course following the new fracture patterns in the rock. Status report, she called into her emergency communicator. Team Alpha reporting. Hayes here, ma'am. We survived, but the tunnel system is completely altered. The Zephyrian assault team, well, they're not a concern anymore. Team Beta checking in. Power relay charges were successful. Martinez here, the ridge just isn't there anymore, Colonel. Gamma team survived. Rivera reporting. The steam explosions exceeded all projections. We basically turned the underground water system into a geological weapon. Webb here, Colonel. The resonance chamber worked beyond our wildest expectations. I think we might have invented a new branch of applied physics. Chen allowed herself a moment of satisfaction before switching to practical concerns. Casualty report? The answers came back from team leaders scattered throughout the cave system. Minor injuries, some equipment losses, but miraculously, almost no fatalities. The humans had survived their own geological weapon. Above them, the Zephyrian fleet was learning the same lesson that military forces throughout history had discovered. Technological superiority meant nothing if your enemy refused to fight according to recognizable rules. Sir, we're receiving a transmission from the surface, the communications officer reported. It appears to be the human commander. Vexitar stared at the communication panel. In 5 minutes, 12,000 humans with no heavy weapons and no orbital support had destroyed a fortress that represented the pinnacle of Imperial engineering. Now they wanted to talk. Put it through. Colonel Chen's image appeared on the holographic display, her uniform dirty and her face streaked with dust, but her eyes still holding that same determined confidence that had bothered Vexitar from the beginning. Admiral Vexitar, she said calmly, I believe you wanted to discuss terms? The bridge fell silent. In the background, alarms continued to sound as damage control teams tried to assess the scope of the disaster. On the tactical display, the ridge that had housed their ground forces was marked as a total loss. What are your terms? Vexitar asked, his voice barely controlled. Simple. Withdraw from this system immediately. Spread the word throughout your empire that humanity is not available for conquest. And understand that what happened here today was just a demonstration of what we're capable of when we're motivated. Vexitar looked at his tactical display, where the symbols representing 10,000 Imperial warriors had changed from green to red. The humans had done the impossible, and they had done it with salvage technology and desperate innovation. And if we refuse? Chen's smile was not pleasant. Admiral, you've seen what 12,000 humans can do to your ground forces. Would you like to find out what 12 billion humans can do to your empire? The transmission ended, leaving the Zephyrian bridge in stunned silence. For 3 centuries, the Empire had conquered species across the galaxy through technological superiority and tactical doctrine. In 5 minutes, a handful of primitive humans had rendered both advantages meaningless. The ridge was gone. The fortress was destroyed. The Empire's reputation for invincibility had died with the warriors trapped in the collapse. And in the caves below, humanity had announced its arrival on the galactic stage with a demonstration that would echo across the galaxy. Sometimes the most advanced civilization could learn the most important lessons from the most unexpected teachers. The disaster was complete. The Empire's certainty was shattered, and Colonel Chen was already planning humanity's next impossible victory. 3 hours after the disaster, Admiral Vexitar stood in his private quarters aboard the flagship Dominion's Edge, staring at a tactical report that would change the course of galactic history. Total Zephyrian casualties, 9,147 warriors lost. Complete destruction of ground-based fortifications. Secondary explosions had damaged 2 orbital platforms. The most devastating military defeat in Imperial history had been inflicted by a species that shouldn't have been capable of meaningful resistance. Admiral, Commander Keyless entered without waiting for permission. Her usual protocol abandoned in the face of catastrophe. The High Command is demanding an immediate explanation. How do we report that 12,000 humans destroyed our entire ground force? Vexitar continued staring at the report. The numbers didn't make sense according to every military doctrine the Empire had developed over 3 centuries of conquest. Superior technology should have guaranteed victory. Advanced tactics should have prevented any possibility of effective resistance. We tell them the truth, he said finally. We tell them that we underestimated human ingenuity, and that our assumptions about technological warfare may need to be reconsidered. Below them, in the transformed landscape of New Terra, Colonel Chen was conducting her own after-action assessment. The human survivors were emerging from their cave shelters to find a world that had been literally reshaped by their desperate gambit. Where the ridge had stood, there was now a vast depression filled with steaming rubble. The geological event had triggered secondary changes throughout the valley system. New springs had appeared while others had disappeared entirely. The underground river network had been completely rearranged, creating formations that would take geologists decades to fully understand. Casualty report? Final numbers, Dr. Webb called out as teams checked in from across the cave network. 14 injuries, 3 serious but stable. No fatalities, came the response. We actually have a lower casualty rate from this operation than we did from the initial evacuation when the Zephyrians first arrived. Webb shook his head in amazement. We turned an entire mountain into a weapon and we managed to survive our own attack. I'm not sure whether that makes us incredibly lucky or incredibly crazy. Probably both, Elena replied. Marcus, the geological readings are showing something interesting. The harmonic resonance patterns we created, they're still propagating through the planetary substrate. At a much lower level, but they're still there. The implications were staggering. The acoustic weapon hadn't just been a one-time event. It had introduced harmonic patterns into the planet's geological structure that could theoretically be reactivated or modified. They had accidentally created a planetary defense system that could be triggered if needed. Colonel Chen received this information with the same calm competence that had carried her through the crisis. Dr. Webb, I want you to document everything. Every frequency pattern, every power setting, every jury-rigged component. We're going to need to reproduce this technology. Colonel, reproducing this would require Zephyrian power cells and resonance crystals. We can't build more acoustic weapons without access to their technology. Chen smiled, the expression carrying implications that would have worried Admiral Vexitar if he could have seen it. Dr. Webb, look around you. We're standing in the wreckage of the most advanced ground fortress in the galaxy. I think we're going to have plenty of Zephyrian technology to work with. The salvage operations began immediately. Human engineering teams, guided by xenotechnology specialists like Dr. Webb, began systematically recovering everything useful from the destroyed ridge fortress. Power cells, resonance crystals, shield generators, weapon systems, sensor arrays. All of it was being carefully extracted and cataloged. But more importantly, they were beginning to understand how Zephyrian technology worked. Their engineering principles are actually quite elegant, Webb explained to Chen as they examined a partially intact shield generator. They rely on harmonic stabilization for almost everything. Shields, weapons, communications, even their structural materials. It's incredibly efficient, but it creates a systematic vulnerability. What kind of vulnerability? If you can disrupt the harmonic patterns, you can disrupt everything. We didn't just find a way to collapse a mountain, Colonel. We found a way to neutralize their entire technological advantage. The revelation was spreading through the human teams like wildfire. They had stumbled upon something that could change the balance of power in the galaxy. The Zephyrian Empire's technology, so advanced and sophisticated, was built on principles that made it vulnerable to the kind of chaotic, improvised warfare that humans seem to excel at. Meanwhile, aboard the Zephyrian flagship, Admiral Vextar was receiving reports that made the tactical situation even more troubling. Long-range sensors were detecting human activity throughout the debris field. Instead of fleeing or hiding after their victory, the humans were salvaging technology from the destroyed fortress. "Sir, intelligence analysis suggests they're attempting to reverse engineer our equipment," Commander Kyles reported. "Should we conduct orbital bombardment to prevent technology transfer?" Vextar considered the option. Orbital bombardment would eliminate the human threat and prevent them from acquiring Imperial technology. But it would also require him to explain to High Command why he had allowed a primitive species to gain access to advanced equipment in the first place. More troubling was the strategic implication. If the humans could reverse engineer Zephyrian technology, they might be able to reproduce the acoustic weapon that had destroyed the Ridge Fortress. The thought of humans with the ability to turn planets themselves into weapons was not something the Empire was prepared to contemplate. Negative on orbital bombardment, Vextar decided. Prepare the fleet for withdrawal to the outer system. We're going to observe and assess before taking further action. The decision would prove to be critical to everything that followed. Over the next several days, human teams worked around the clock to understand and adapt Zephyrian technology. What they discovered exceeded their wildest expectations. The Imperial equipment wasn't just advanced, it was modular, designed to be reconfigured for different purposes. Shield generators could be converted into communication arrays, weapon systems could be repurposed as power sources, sensor equipment could be modified into manufacturing tools. But most importantly, all of it operated on the same harmonic principles that made it vulnerable to acoustic disruption. "We can build more than weapons," Dr. Webb reported to Colonel Chen after a week of intensive research. "We can build a technological infrastructure that rivals theirs. And because we understand the harmonic vulnerabilities, we can design defenses they can't easily counter." Chen nodded, but her attention was focused on the larger strategic picture. "Doctor, how long would it take to build acoustic weapons capable of planetary defense? With the salvaged equipment and what we've learned about their technology? Maybe 6 months for a basic defensive system. 2 years for something that could protect an entire star system. And if we had access to more Zephyrian technology?" Webb's expression grew thoughtful. "Colonel, are you thinking what I think you're thinking? I'm thinking that the Empire has been conquering species across the galaxy for 3 centuries. I'm thinking that there are probably a lot of other worlds that would be interested in learning how to turn Zephyrian technological superiority against itself." The implications were staggering. Instead of simply defending Earth's colonies, humanity could become the catalyst for galactic revolution. Every species that had been conquered by the Empire could potentially be armed with weapons that turned their oppressors' own technology into a liability. Admiral Vextar would have been horrified to learn that Colonel Chen was already making contact with resistance movements on dozens of conquered worlds. The acoustic weapon technology was being shared, along with detailed analysis of Zephyrian harmonic vulnerabilities. What had started as a desperate defense of one human colony was becoming a galaxy-wide insurgency. 6 months later, the first reports reached Imperial High Command. Fortress worlds throughout the Empire were experiencing geological events that seemed to target Zephyrian installations with impossible precision. Conquered species that had been subjugated for generations were suddenly demonstrating technological capabilities that shouldn't exist. The Empire's 3-century reign of technological supremacy was ending, brought down by a species that had specialized in making the impossible work when everything else failed. In his final report to High Command, Admiral Vextar wrote, "The humans have demonstrated a fundamental principle that our military doctrine failed to account for. Advanced technology is only as strong as its weakest systematic vulnerability. By building our entire civilization on harmonic stabilization, we created a single point of failure that could be exploited by any enemy creative enough to think beyond conventional tactics. I recommend immediate policy revision regarding human contact and comprehensive review of our technological dependencies. The species we dismissed as primitive has proven capable of weaponizing the very principles that made our empire possible. The Ridge was safe until the humans taught us that safety is an illusion. and that sometimes the most primitive warriors can defy